Welcome to Publicly Interested, the podcast where we talk to people making a difference in the public discourse. Today's guest is Jane Prince. Jane was an elected member of the St. Paul City Council for 8 years. She's been involved with municipal and democratic politics for over 30 years. Today, she talks about her story and career, how being on the city council actually works, representing an underprivileged area, and so much more. I really appreciate Jane coming on, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation.
What happened before 2015?
Well, I am originally from Massachusetts, and I come from a family that derived tremendous career satisfaction in public service. My dad, my sister, my mom, my grandparents. It was the way to have a happy life and build community and all that stuff. So I moved out here in 76. Long story, but it was extremely random that I ended up in the Twin Cities with a girlfriend from college. I graduated from UNH in 75. But I had originally intended to go to DC because my sister worked on Capitol Hill and I thought I'd follow her example until I realized that hot, humid weather is not where I do my best work. So, and I love winter and I love wearing layers. And so anyway, I worked for the city of Minneapolis for 7 years, the Housing and Redevelopment Authority. And then I came to St. Paul and worked at the Department of Planning and Economic Development. And I loved St. Paul. I loved everything about the way the city worked. And George Latimer was the mayor then, who was the longest serving mayor in St. Paul. And he was such an important example to me of the way in which local government, besides being really personal and you get to see the people that you represent and it's close up and very accessible and one person can make a difference. Besides all that, in terms of policies and programs and big ideas, you can try anything at the local level. So I was really inspired by working for the Latimer administration for about 6 years. And then 1993, I was supporting a good friend who was running for mayor, Andy Dawkins. Have you run across Andy at all?
Yeah.
He'd make a good interview. He is a character, but he ran for mayor in 93, got the DFL endorsement, and then asked me if I would be his campaign manager. And so I had no experience with that, but I did, and it was a tremendous experience, and Andy was a great candidate, and there's a whole story of how things kind of unraveled, but Norm Coleman won that year. So I thought my political career was over in St. Paul at that point, and in 95, I was asked if I would be the city DFL chair. And I said, "Oh, that is so funny. No, thanks," and hung up the phone. And then I started thinking about what I had learned about how the ways in which the party should be supporting their endorsed candidates, and they weren't. And I thought we could raise money and we could really get serious about, pushing caucus turnout and make the party really energetic. And so that was a great experience. And that's how I met Jay Beninav, who won the Ward 4 council seat. I was his legislative aide for 10 years. Phenomenal experience. And never thought I would run for office until Kathy Lantry, who had been the council member in Ward 7 for about 20 years, was appointed by Chris Coleman to be Public Works Director. And by then I was 60 years old, and I thought, I can't do this. I'm not going to do this. I won't run for office. And then my husband, who I thought would say, good, you shouldn't run for office, said, I think you need to think about that more because I think you could really regret it if you didn't just go for it.
Wow.
And he was absolutely right. I mean, it was like I ran against 4 white men for the endorsement. One was a cop, one was a lawyer, one had been our Senate district chair, and the fourth was John Slade. I don't know if you know John, but very, very active on MICA housing issues. Really a good man. And I pulled off the endorsement, and at that point, I didn't end up having either. Well, I didn't have this was 2016, so was it ranked choice then? It must have been. And I was unopposed going into the final election. There was talk that the interim chief, Bill Finney, who was the interim person, was thinking about running, but he didn't end up announcing. So my first time getting elected to office, I was unopposed, which I was really clear, this is not good. And I campaigned just as though I had a tough race, because I did think it would not be the furthest from reality that Mickey Mouse could win the election, write-in votes. I mean, I truly thought that I have got to really work and worry about it. And it was a great experience, and I did win.
So you've been involved with, city politics in St. Paul then for the best part of 30 years now.
Yeah.
How do you think you obviously ran a mayoral campaign in 93. How do you feel it's changed since then, the way our elections go, the way people campaign in the city? 'Cause it seems to me like it's even changed in the past 10 years.
Yeah. Well, when I managed Andy's campaign, the DFL endorsement process was really vibrant. And there were conservative DFLers, and there were progressive DFLers, and there were centrist DFLers. And when we got into that endorsement race, and mind you, I was not the manager when we got endorsed, but it was really hard fought. And Andy squeaked through out of it. But, when you looked at the candidates that were running in that endorsement process, there was Bob Long from Highland, who was very much a centrist, very thoughtful guy. Marlene Johnson, who was the former lieutenant governor under Rudy Perpich. Ray Pharisee, who was a very highly regarded lawyer from Highland who served on a lot of boards and commissions. And it was just really outstanding, diverse candidates who ran then. I say diverse, but there weren't any candidates of color in that field, as I recall. Oh, John Manillo was one of the candidates, so real estate developer. But the DFL process, I think at that point was just a lot more functional. For example, Matt, maybe you know the answer to this question. We've got a mayoral election this year. The mayor just announced on Facebook that he was running. And is there a caucus date set yet? Have you heard?
Not as far as I'm aware.
I mean, it's outrageous that, the party has become a handful of people who kind of call the shots, and we have these little endorsing conventions, and the progressive leadership in the party, it's not a bad thing, but there's kind of not any of the other brands of Democrats, which I think is too bad. Also, if you look at the last few years or the last few city elections, the caucus is held pretty early. The endorsements are made for council by April. And then there's nothing else that happens. Like the next time that anybody could anybody could run against the DFL endorsed candidate, but that is a very high bar. And so you kind of wait until filings close in mid-August, and nobody wants to get in, as was the case in my year. So I think, and we can get into this in a bigger way, but I think that the ballot question that has moved the elections to even years is the right thing, because voter turnout in city elections is dismal. And if you take me back to my first election, you know how many votes I got? I mean, I represent 40,000 some people.
How many votes?
1,500.
15.
And the universe of voters in off-year elections is teensy. So I had a universe of likely DFL voters in a city year of about 4,000. So I was able to go to all those doors twice. But how many did you have for Isaac? I mean, that's much bigger if you look.
Right. Obviously, we did that in the third ward, so we had a few more. But even so, it was about half of what a general election is.
Yeah.
That's the highest. That's the highest turnout ward by a long way.
Right.
So.
Well, and I worry about it being the same year as presidential years, because you definitely have the most uninformed voters in a presidential year. I kind of wish they had changed it to the state year with the statewide offices, because I do worry about it's going to cost a lot more to run. But you can't be electing people with a handful of voters. And then people don't feel represented, and they're not. Yeah. They should vote, but they don't.
One thing I've sort of heard from people, and I guess it's about both the endorsing conventions and the elections, is that like sort of post the turn of the century, that the interest and engagement has gone down.
Mm-hmm.
That previously city endorsing conventions were, as you said, sort of bigger, more people, and the turnout was higher.
Yeah.
I guess, do you feel that people have engaged less in sort of local stuff going on?
Yeah, and I can't quite figure it out. I mean, when I worked for Jay, he ran in 98, and that was when council elections were just 2 years.
No.
And so then in 2000, or not 98, 97, then in 99, the ballot question was on that said, should city council people serve for 4-year terms? However it was worded, we were really surprised it passed, because we felt like, why would the voters want less opportunity to vote for their council member? Because as hard as that would have been, I think, like House members, it gives you a lot more direct power to hold over your electeds. And but what we think is, the way the ballot question was worded, we think that people thought they were voting for term limits. Shall city council members serve 4-year terms? And so whatever it was, we suddenly end up with 4-year terms. And the safety that you feel on a 4-year term after you've been elected in an even-year election and hardly anybody voted, it's kind of like you just feel like you can do anything in there. And so I think it became frustrating for the public to get involved. I don't know, I haven't thought about, was the DFL losing credibility, or it just became so far to the left, in my view, because when I worked for Beninav from 98 to 2007, people thought I was a raving lefty. They really truly thought that I was so crazed. And now in my 8 years in office, people think I'm a conservative. And so who knows? But in any event, it's curious. I don't know why, but I don't think we've elected people to our party offices who, at least at the city level, um, I really believed in driving turnout. The executive committee that I had when I was the DFL chair, um, we were working on increasing precinct caucus turnout. And there's a tension. I'm sure you're aware of this. There's a tension in parties about we don't want new people to come because we don't know what they'll do. But the perfect example of why you shouldn't do that, in my opinion, is when Hillary ran against Obama. And Obama advertised our precinct caucuses on TV. Come out to your caucus. Hillary, who had one of the Humphrey sons as her campaign chair in Minnesota, it was like, we're just going to kind of rely on the people who show up. That's the way the old guard of the party worked at that point. And Obama just flooded the caucuses, and Hillary didn't have a prayer. So we learned a lot in 2008, which is, if you have a good message and you want people to come to caucuses, they'll do it. But they have to be excited, or they have to feel like they could be part of what happens. And I think, we've had mayors and councils that once they're in office, they don't really care what people think. I think I shouldn't be that harsh maybe, but I think people feel really disempowered by most of our DFL elected officials in St. Paul.
Interesting. One thing I've heard sort of consistently is people just sort of generally disengage with their local as well.
Mm-hmm.
That like sort of post the internet, people are just not as engaged in some ways. But it does sometimes feel like you said, that sometimes the people in power in these parties want the people they expect to show up.
Yeah.
So you did get elected
Yeah.
in 2015, and
Yeah.
you served for 8 years until 2024, until the start of 2024.
Yeah.
Um,
So I had a
Right.
re-election in 2019,
Re-election.
and then I got 1,900 votes, which I think is what Shaniqua got when she just. So we're talking. If you're thinking about running,
You don't need that many.
no.
Well, so you got elected in the 7th Ward, which is on the east side.
Yeah.
I guess tell me a little bit about the area and what the needs of your constituents sort of were in those 8 years representing the east side.
Well, let me just say this about the east side before I start, because when I was working in the Latimer administration, my husband and I had decided to buy a house, and I wanted to participate in one of the low interest mortgage programs. And I talked to one of my friends and colleagues who worked in the housing information office, and they said, "Joe, Dave and I need to find a house. Do you know of anything?" And he said, "Oh God, I saw this house the other day that I love. It's over in Mounds Park." And there are all these towns that have mound in them. So I'm thinking, Mounds Park. I said, "Where's that?" He said, "Jane, it's at the high end of the Kellogg Bridge. It's right there." And I honestly could, being that I came from Massachusetts and had worked at that point, I worked in St. Paul for 6 years or something. I had never been over to the east side, and I worked for the city. So that told me a lot. I didn't know the east side, and we did end up buying that house. I didn't know the east side, but neither does most of St. Paul to this day. A couple things that happened. We got some great restaurants landed on Payne Avenue. Some destination businesses in my own neighborhood. Sweet Hollow Cafe opened, which was a really phenomenal coffee shop with house-made bakery and great food. So, destination businesses brought people in, but they brought them from, St. Louis Park, not even so much Mac Groveland, because people do not know the East Side. It's more than a third of the city's land mass. And it used to be made up of large corporations, 3M, Ham's Brewing, um, Whirlpool Appliances. I mean, we had amazing, huge corporations that manufactured real things that people bought in America and created great union jobs. And so it was a good place to live, good jobs that you could walk to. In my neighborhood, Mounds Park Hospital was there. St. John's Hospital was where Metro State is. I mean, it was a more vibrant part of the city when it was a manufacturing. It was the manufacturing part of the city. I mean, there were other places that had some manufacturing, like American Hoist and Derrick was on the river, and then of course Schmidt Brewing and whatever that was before. Um, but the East Side, when the corporations moved out and the jobs went away, it was a really low income place that became. It had always been a place that attracted waves of immigrants. So Swede Hollow, which is near Mounds Park, connected to Mounds Park. Swede Hollow in the 1850s, it was the Swedes who came, and then a wave of Germans, and then a wave of Italians, and then Mexican people, which that was when they determined that it wasn't safe to live down there, and that the city came in and burned down all the dwellings. I mean, it was really a dramatic story. But anyway, so the immigrant communities coming to the East Side is definitely something that goes back generations and generations. And that is, when you look at when I worked in the Latimer administration, um, Latimer, I think it was through public housing, got some changes to the law that to public housing that said you didn't have to have fulfilled the residency requirement to move into public housing. It was probably also a time when we had some vacancies, but we were able to attract lots of Hmong people to come and live here. And one of the generals from the Secret War settled in St. Paul. So the East Side, Hmong people, many that I have talked to, consider the East Side of St. Paul to be their homeland in America, which is pretty phenomenal. And if you look at the Hmong community, um, they they have they've been very successful in St. Paul, and getting into home ownership, and um, you know sending their kids to great schools. And so the East Side has a lot of things going for it, but without the large corporations, um, job creation is really important over there. And there have been some good initiatives over the years. When Randy Kelly was mayor, he was an East Sider, and he did the Phelan Corridor project, which brought a bunch of um, med med tech medical offices to that roadway that cuts through the East Side and ends up at the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. So there's been some redevelopment that has made a difference, but it hasn't changed the fact that most of our most of our mayors, most of our um, elected leaders, um, anybody who's running from outside of the East Side doesn't spend much time campaigning on the East Side because voter turnout is so low. And that is due to, I believe, the fact that we have probably um, more concentrations of poverty on the East Side than anywhere else in the city. And that's due to, um, people coming to town, immigrants coming to town might not speak English, um, and, trying to get acclimated. But just voter turnout's terrible. And all of us who run over there say, doggone it, we're going to turn out voters. We're going to get the message out to everybody that the best way to make the East Side, because people are very loyal to the East Side. It really is East Side pride is a real thing. But you try to get them working on that. It was funny. I had a meeting with the East Side Area Business Association. Is a great business group, and Paris Dunning is the executive director. But we had a meeting about, I think it was the sales tax referendum, and Shaniqua was running at that point, and so I explained to everybody. I said, if you don't, however you feel about the sales tax, what you need to realize about St. Paul is that the lion's share of voters on a citywide issue come from west of Hamlin. And so whatever they want in the prosperous neighborhoods of St. Paul, that's what's likely to pass. That was true with the trash program and rent stabilization, where everybody thought they were doing a good thing when they voted for it. And I said, and if you don't want it, you better start turning out votes, because it's going to be done to you. Whatever they decide over there they want in terms of a sales tax. And after the meeting, Shaniqua said to me, I had not thought about that, but you're absolutely right. This is why the East Side doesn't have power. We have a lot of immigrants, a lot of low income families, and then add to it, Matt, that when the census happened, this is so interesting. When the census happened, we didn't have to pick up much new ground, even though our population had increased, because our population increased with large families. So our voting strength still is bad because we have large families. So a lot of our voting strength is not voting age yet. So we've got a lot of strikes against us, but I truly believe at the same time, over the years that I was on the council and the years when Kathy Lantry was on the council, we worked like dogs. Our neighborhood groups, our district councils, our business associations really worked together because we were being ignored downtown, but we could do a lot of things on our own. And we've gotten good foundation support. And, once you wanted to talk about, if you want to see a community succeed that is made up of vast, multicultural diversity of the East Side is like nowhere else in the city. And we can be the part of town where people succeed in place, not the development with displacement, but we can do development that helps the people who live here find good paying jobs and affordable housing if we do the right things. So I'm very optimistic about the Hillcrest project and the ways in which it was kind of like making lemonade from lemons. The city got the Port Authority to buy that golf course and then said, you can't use TIF and don't come to us for any other money, which is that's like redlining. I mean, that's the city's view of, we have this opportunity in Highland Bridge. We have this opportunity on the East Side, opposite corner, and one of them gets $275 million in TIF, and one of them gets no TIF. Now that's changed now because we have housing TIF. But bless the Port Authority for just saying we got to buy this site, because if we let it sell off in pieces, we've missed a huge opportunity. So they're creating the vision was 1,000 jobs, 1,000 housing units. I'm not sure how those numbers are, falling out, but I do think that we can be very proud of the development that we have seen on the east side.
Absolutely. Obviously, during your time on the council, you had 2015, 2024. A few things happened in the world and in St. Paul
Yeah.
during those years. We had, let's see, a new mayor in 2017 in St. Paul.
Mm-hmm.
We had the trash.
Mm-hmm.
We had rent stabilization.
Mm-hmm.
We had some pretty intense city council elections.
Mm-hmm.
I guess from your vantage point, seeing all of this, what sort of stood out to you from when you were on the council and interacting with your colleagues as well?
You know, well, here's one: rent stabilization. I had been involved as a housing advocate from before I worked for this city. I worked in housing in Minneapolis, and then at PED, I worked on housing and then working under Jay. We were trying, we went through a housing crisis in '99. That was the same thing that we have seen, where there weren't enough units for the people who wanted to live here. But so I believe in developing affordable housing. Really, I really truly believe in it. I feel like I understand it. I've been around it enough, and I listen. I mean, I didn't work in housing development directly, but I worked around it, and suddenly I thought, you know, maybe rent stabilization could be a good thing. And when I read that ordinance, my head exploded. It's like, what are we thinking? This is crazy. It's like capping rent at 3% sounds good. Our average rent increases in Minneapolis and St. Paul, when we're talking about this, were below 2% or around 2%. Like, what are we doing? What are we hoping to accomplish here? And then it would not, no carve out for new construction, really vague language like, the landlord has to be able to make a reasonable return on investment, but there was nothing was defined or, by this much cost of living or whatever. I mean, it was just the worst ordinance. And if we could have gotten them to make that better before they did it, who knows? I mean, it might not have really destroyed our housing market, but that was a terrible thing. Well, guess what? The council had nothing to do with it. It was done with signatures. It was, good-hearted, thoughtful people believing that they're helping their nephew or they're helping the elderly woman down the street or whatever they were thinking. 3%, that gives landlords enough. 4 of us on the council opposed it. So if it had in any way come before us, I mean, the 4 of us that opposed it were 4 that didn't agree on a whole bunch. It was me, Dai Tao, Amy Brenmone, and Chris Tolbert. I mean, just kind of an odd foursome, but we all saw the same thing. This is the unintended consequences are gonna overwhelm the city, and this is gonna be really bad for renters and landlords alike. So that was an interesting thing to have happen. Now, trash. Take trash. When organized trash became a thing, it came out of Mac Groveland, and I love Mac Groveland, and I have many friends there.
Give us some background on this issue. I think a lot of people may not know that St. Paul had, as it's now known, the trash wars.
Yeah.
How did that come about? Yeah, give us a little background.
Well, it's funny because Latimer is my hero of mayors in my lifetime, but Latimer is the one who just decided, let's get rid of the trash and let's just have people line up their own trash service. So that's what we had from the late 70s on. In 1999, let's say, when I worked for Jay, Jay represented Ward 4, and the idea that we have, 6 trucks a week coming up and down our alleys, and it's just disruptive, and it's bad for the streets. And so Jay says to the city attorney, who was a lovely guy then. I think he was only the acting city attorney, but he was very experienced, had been there a long time. And Jay said, what about organized hauling? And the city attorney just like, Jay, do not say that out loud ever again. Because he said, dealing with the trash haulers and the trash hauling bar association, the lawyers of the trash companies, you would be getting us into something that we will regret forever. Well, probably a little overly dramatic, but the reason we had a lousy contract in 2017 is because we didn't hire an outside lawyer who knows how the industry works and who knows how to compete with their lawyers. We were like sitting ducks. And I was asking questions, and our team, again, like rent stabilization, just this really thoughtful team of, a city attorney, we had a environmental consultant, we had public works people, young, energetic, and they were like involved in trying to negotiate this thing. It was like sending lambs to the slaughter. And we got that consortium plan, which you knew on day one, you knew before day one, that when you put all these family-owned haulers in a consortium with Waste Management and Republic, these multinational corporations, they're gonna get rid of all the little guys and take over the plan, and then we'll lose all our competitive advantage. And God only knows if they'll do adequate customer service or whatever. But for me, in the ward that I represent, I can't tell you the number of people who would say, Jane, I want my hauler. I need my hauler. One woman, she lives a couple blocks from me. Her name is Rose. And she said, do you know that the deal I have with my hauler is when I have a full bin, he comes and picks it up. He doesn't come other than when I call. And she said, don't make me have to deal with this and pay for something that I don't need. And that was echoed throughout my ward. And if you look at the map for where the votes were, as I've said, everybody, the yes votes, let's say west of Hamlin, it's just bright dark green. It's just everybody over there wanted it. And then my ward was the only one that voted against it.
Really?
And then there were lots of no votes in the same carve-out area. And this is something people need to look at in terms of, and I think we are now. I really think we are. I think this administration is committed to it, but it's really going to be hard to change. The red votes followed the outline that's basically the 1935 redlining map. Where people are poor, they're still poor. We have not changed the way our land use planning, whatever we did, we are still reflecting bad redlining. So I had that voting map on my desk for the rest of the time I served in office. I said, if you want to see lack of equity, take a look at this map. It's a disgrace. But anyway, the contract that our little team ended up negotiating was not good. So Dan Bostrom, who represented Ward 6, and I both voted against it. And, our neighborhoods are very similar. what it ended up doing is, so if I if I live in a 4-unit building, which is tons of them, between 1 and 4 units on the east side, you had to have service. You couldn't share. You couldn't have, a couple of people going in on, or some of those buildings. I'm sure they could have found a better way to do it. And of course, what they used to do was they'd have a dumpster, and so it was managed that way. But so right away, we're adding $20 to the rent of all these low income renters in a part of the city where they can't afford. It's very difficult to afford any kind of rent increase. And I remember hearing someone, I think it was this issue, but I said, I'm talking to seniors who it's like they have money to eat and they have money for their prescriptions and maybe they have money for cable TV. And somebody said to me, well, they don't need cable. Like add trash in. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? I mean, it's this sort of attitude that, oh, of course they have disposable income. They're spending it on cable. So anyway, I really felt like I called that one. But well, I won't get into it, but people like Isaiah, the people that are involved in Isaiah, got sold on the idea that this was going to be a good thing for people. And when I did an informational session with them and they said, well, where was I on trash? This is in 2019 when I ran for re-election. And I said, it's you, Isaiah, should not be supporting this plan. It has resulted in, sure enough, exactly what we thought: waste management buying out almost all the little providers. Not that the little local haulers didn't get paid adequately, but those were family businesses that people liked in St. Paul. They were the kind of businesses we want to do business with. And I said, waste management has a terrible environmental record. It has a terrible record of dealing with its employees. Why are you promoting this organized trash thing? And I didn't get a good answer. I just think that it got pitched to people, good-hearted people, that this was somehow equitable. That this is going to be good for people. Everybody will have equal access to hauling. Now, the current plan, I don't know if people know this, but the city approved it in March of 2024, and the council didn't vote on it. So it's a contract that's serving, I think our trash plan serves 150,000 households. And the council didn't have a vote on it. And when I asked about that, not that I pursued it because I was no longer in office, but I said, what do you mean the council's not voting for it? We had to vote on the contract in 2017. Well, the city attorney had given some ruling like, well, it's a continuation of a service and it's just a change of providers. Well, it really wasn't just a change in providers. We're taking 10% of the city is going to be done by city trucks. So we're going to be buying all these new trucks. We're taking back in the customer service and billing. So that's going to result in more people having to be hired to run the program. How are we going to pay for all that? Through a per card fee. And then, of course, we're seeing right now the controversy about putting a plant over on the riverfront. I mean, that's terrible. But I have to admit, when I heard there was going to have to be a plant built, I thought, you watch, they will put that on the east side because we get everything that no one else wants. But it's crazy to put it on West 7th on a river location. I mean, the whole thing. But nobody got to vote for that. I mean, you couldn't call your council member and say, please vote against that, because they didn't vote for it or against it. They were never given a chance to vote. So that's what I meant earlier on about people feeling like their elected officials just really are not paying attention.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of things that sort of happen at the administrative level that people will miss and aren't sure who's responsible.
Right.
So I want to come on to city budgets and that process and the financial position of cities and of St. Paul. I guess, what was the process of the budget like when you were on the council, and what was your experience sort of within that?
Well, I was I was not I was not the most popular council member among council members. So, and I have done things differently. I've thought a lot about it. I mean, I suppose if I had thought about it, I would have tried to do things differently. But the budget processes from year to year were handled differently depending on who the council president was, and the first year that Melvin was mayor was probably the best budget for me, and it really surprised me because I had not supported the mayor in that election, and so I just figured that things that I wanted in the budget would probably not rise to the surface. But what happened that year, and I think maybe the subsequent year, was the council president, who by then was Amy Brenmone, and Jamie Tincher as the deputy mayor, went around to all the council offices, and we all just individually talked with them about what we were hoping to get out of the budget process, where we could say, let's not raise the levy as high as last year, when Chris Coleman left or whatever. And one thing that I had been trying to do since I had gotten on the council was to get Highwood Hills Rec Center back open in my ward, which is a really remote part of the city where there are tons of kids and a large concentration of multi-unit family housing that desperately needed a rec center. And so that was at the top of my list, and I had gotten nowhere with Chris Coleman on it. So I just kind of figured, well, I'll go all in and see what happens here. But that budget, and I remember saying to Jamie, I am so incredibly grateful that you are reopening Highwood Hills. And I said, I just didn't expect it because, I know the mayor felt bad that I didn't support him. And she said, that isn't how we do politics. She said, we see a need and we want to fill it. And so that first year of the Carter administration, I felt like in that I got somewhere with it, and I felt the budget overall was pretty good. I felt pretty good about it. Subsequent years, it really varied. It kind of varied on what the politics were between the mayor and the council, because as years went by, Melvin was less engaged. Melvin and Jamie were less engaged with council members. I mean, that was my perception. I don't know if they would say that to be the case. Different when council president has a different relationship, and over the subsequent years, I felt like we were hiring where we shouldn't be. We weren't dealing with the fact that we were ending up, even before the tragedy of George Floyd, we were ending up with huge attrition in the police department, and we were only doing one academy a year to fill that. So, we'd be getting down to dangerously low numbers. So the council, we worked together on some of those issues and got somewhere, but, I didn't agree with a number of priorities of the mayor. And I think, I don't know, probably between the 2018, which would have been the 2019 budget, because 2018 would have been Coleman's last budget. So the 2019 budget, which was one that I really felt I participated in, between 2019 and 2023, I think there were at least 2 or 3 budgets that I just couldn't vote for. And one was the last one. In 2023, I voted against the budget, and about 6 months later, I pulled out my remarks that I had read at the meeting. And I thought, I was so right on there. This was not a good budget, and it's killing people to have these increases. And, one budget had us hiring 2 new communications people for the mayor's office. It's like, we don't have that kind of money. During COVID, we had a 0 levy increase. Was also a mayoral election year, so that was handy. But that was probably the right thing to do. But the budget, I definitely did not have great budget mastery. But we got a lot done on the east side, so.
Yeah. I guess generally speaking, obviously now you're involved with a group called Insight St. Paul.
Mm-hmm.
In dollar site St. Paul, if you want to Google that. Dollar sign instead of the S. I guess broadly speaking, what financial challenges are cities like St. Paul and St. Paul in particular facing, and what has the group tried to raise and successfully raised?
And one thing I'll say, as far as my getting involved in the Insight group, we're genuinely concerned about the ways in which, the city has been. It's not misplaced that the city's very concerned about the lowest income people, but meanwhile, there's this sort of middle group of renters and homeowners that are being taxed out of their homes, plain and simple. And so I feel like, you've got to really look at the fact that we have to worry about how we're dealing with people who can't afford every year to have their rent go up significantly, and or their taxes go up significantly. And so when we get together, over the years, I've been part of a few efforts to bring people together independently and try to raise awareness about this and that. I think what makes Insight different is that we had grave concerns, and I was able to recruit one of my constituents, a former city budget director. Under Latimer, he was Latimer's budget director, and then when Latimer left office, Greg went to work as the city council's budget director. And just a brilliant guy, and somebody who he's not political. He really wants to get at the numbers, and he wants to help us get the word out to taxpayers as well as policymakers, and say, just look at these numbers and think about, how could we work together to change some policies or make the city more affordable. Because St. Paul has always been a city of neighborhoods, very affordable, great range of incomes, good schools, nice parks. We've got a lot going for us, and if we don't get a handle on it, so Greg did his report. I swear, if we had to hire Greg to do the work that he did, we'd be into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, because he worked from the end of August to October 29th when we released the report. 18-page report that is amazing. And he had to just be working day and night to do it. And what he came out with, and I think this is the most important snapshot for people to understand is, first of all, we all know we have the highest sales tax in the state at 9.875. Secondly, we have among the highest property tax rates in the state. It's 1.39, and what that means is, someone else can explain it better than me. But among the very highest property tax rates in the state, we have the highest percentage of tax-stressed households, which means that they're spending more than 5% of their household income on property taxes. And we're, of the 5 largest cities in Minnesota, we're the only one losing population. So we're trending in a bad direction. Meanwhile, we've got the problem of what's happened to downtowns all over the country. I will accept that the mayor frequently says, well, these are the same problems facing all cities of our size. Well, one thing that isn't facing every city of our size is 40% of our downtown buildings were owned by a guy that died a couple of months ago. The buildings weren't maintained. They're in terrible shape. No one wants to buy them. And every day you open the paper and there's another crashing and burning of a Madison Equities building. It's just terrible. But so we have that problem that would have happened, COVID or not. But with the loss of commercial tax base, we have no choice but to shift that to residential property taxpayers. And that is not a good outlook. So, we really should really be looking at every dollar and figuring out, what do we really need to spend money on? And over and over and over from the people of St. Paul, you hear, could we just get basic services? I don't care about bike trails. I don't care about, whatever the big ideas are that keep distracting the city away from taking care of basic services and making people feel like they live in a city that they can be proud of. I live by Mounds Park, and we're involved in a really important co-management agreement with with Dakota tribes, and it's obviously an important burial site, sacred site, and for the Dakota community. But over the years that I've lived there, this is the Dakota work that's being done now. Thank goodness it's being done well. But, I lived in the neighborhood for 30 years where they put in a bunch of plantings and some other stuff and then never came back and ever trimmed or maintained it. I mean, vegetation management in our parks is terrible. So these are all the kinds of things that it's like, when you walk out of your house in the morning and you see the trees are down on your block and the sidewalks a mess and the streets are potholes, and it's not good. So I really think that what Insight is trying to do is say, let's just be aware of where we're at and think about what are some things we can do to strengthen our financial outlook. And there are, one of the more controversial pieces of what we're doing is really examining tax increment financing. Because the other thing happening downtown is that tax increment financing works when when the building owners pay the equivalent of what their property tax would be to pay off the bonds. Well, if the building isn't worth much anymore and that they're not producing increments, and enough money to pay off the bonds, then where are we? And people have gotten so confused and flummoxed by tax increment financing, but we've overused it. That's another metric, is we're the biggest user of tax increment financing in the state. Minneapolis quietly, probably about 15 years ago, just said, we have enough TIF. We are not going to do this anymore. They're much more transparent about how their TIF districts are producing. And that's one of the things that Insight is going to try to turn around, is at least to have real transparency on what the status of all our districts is. So I'm hopeful with the work that we've done that we've had great meetings with the city council. The council took a stand this year and reduced the levy, and really went through a lot of anguish to try to make the cuts that they did. So I'm really happy to see that I think our council members are hearing the same thing that our Insight members are feeling, and that they really want to be part of the solution. So I think they set a really important tone on the budget this year, and hopefully that'll continue.
Absolutely, and it's a good positive note for us to end on. Thank you so much, Shane, for coming on.
Hey, you bet, Matt. This was a riot.